All right. Should I say it again? We're recording. All right. Welcome to another episode, guys. If this is the first time that you've tuned into our podcast, this is the Scientific Outdoorsman. And what we do here is we dive into the science of wildlife, fish, and management of those resources and try to help you understand the mechanisms that are involved a little bit better. And hopefully, it'll make you a better hunter, a better fisherman, or a better supporter of wildlife management. So today we've got a pretty exciting episode. Me and Matt just got back from Montana. We did a little bit of spring bear hunting, and that had us thinking about spring bear seasons. And so we're gonna be talking about cub mortality or orphaning in this paper here. And I think you might learn a couple things that you didn't know. So make sure you stick around for that discussion. But first, let's see. Do we have any announcements to make?
Not
No,
on my end.
I got one. I just want to give a mad shout out to, and we're going to talk about BHA Rendezvous because me and Matt just came back from that. But I just want to give a huge shout out to like all the companies that support backcountry hunters and anglers. There's so many of them, and without all the like raffle prizes stuff that they donate, I feel like Rendezvous would not be as exciting as it is. I mean, it's really great being in like a room full of people that share the same sort of views as you do and care about the same things and are focused on hunting and fishing like you are. But man, there's so many cool companies on display there. Like Vortex, huge supporter of BHA, Irish Setter, Onyx. Like, what are some of the other companies that?
Was it like Grail and
Grail makes really cool stuff.
Benchmade?
I mean,
They were there.
there was what?
Benchmade knives.
Benchmade. Yeah, there was like probably 50 different companies that had booths there just showing off some of their gear. We met some really cool people, and we might have some of those folks on the podcast in the future. So just want to give a shout out to everybody that's supporting BHA, everybody that supports conservation. We appreciate it. So um, upcoming, I do have an announcement actually. We have my favorite event that I put together with Swamp and Stomp and Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, the Florida chapter. We do a scouting workshop. People have been asking me about this workshop for weeks, months, years. When are you guys doing it again? When is it happening? It's coming up. It's going to be June 28th. That's in 10 days, which probably by the time this gets posted, it's going to be less than a week away. You can buy tickets online. I'll make sure to put the link down in the description. It's $20 to join the workshop, but Onyx is sponsoring the workshop. They're going to be giving every participant a year-long membership, which is worth like $35, I think. So for paying $20 to participate, you get $35 worth of stuff on top of the workshop. So it's a great deal, and all the money goes to a good cause. It goes to BHA and allows us to get people to the meetings to, fight for things like the bear hunt and other conservation issues. So hopefully you guys will come out and join us. I think Cody's probably going to be there too, right, Cody?
I was hoping I'm going to be out of town, unfortunately.
Oh,
But
really?
last year I went. It was the first year I hunted, and I got a little knowledge before going out. It was super helpful. Going to this thing was a fun time. Learned a
Yeah.
lot. Met
Okay.
some cool people.
So I guess
But
Cody's
not
not
this year.
here. Boo.
I know. Sorry.
But anyway, it's a great event, like Cody said. So hopefully you guys will come out. And then there's a luncheon afterwards where there's free food, there's free beer. It's a really good time. It's going to be at Captain Kenny's like hunting and fishing store, and yeah. So come out. There's going to be raffles. There's going to be all kinds of exciting stuff going on. So hopefully I'll see you guys there. That's the only announcement that I have.
So just to make sure I got the date right, even though I won't be there because I'm in Colorado, you said 10 days from today, so that would be Saturday, June 28th. Is that correct?
Yes.
Cool.
I said June 28th, didn't I?
Mhm.
Did you?
Yeah.
Oh, I missed that.
You got to get there early though, right?
Yeah, you got to get there at like 7 o'clock, and then we hit the woods at 7:30. We're just trying to avoid that hot part of the day. We don't want people passing out because it has happened in the past. Um, but anyway, all the details that you need about it are on the website that's in the link below. So go check it out. Hopefully, we'll see you guys there. There is a cap for how many people can sign up for the workshop. So if there's tickets available, make sure you buy them because you might not be able to get them if you wait too long. All right. In other news, Florida got their quota permit announcements today. I got one, an exciting one. I'm not going to say what it was. Cody got two, I think, right?
I got one. Yeah.
Oh, okay, you got one. So some exciting hunts coming up in the near future. And then Matt and me are probably going to chase elk in September. So anyway, BHA, dude. Matt, this was your first time coming to Rendezvous. What did you think?
There were some great people there. And like you said, I mean, so many vendors, every corner there was someone else to talk to, get to see a different product. And everyone was super friendly. Whether it was BHA members or those vendors, everyone was happy to chat about their hunting and fishing experiences, their life, where they came from and all that. Great food, great music, great drinks. Missoula, which is where it was held, is a great little town. Definitely plan on heading back. All the proceeds go to this great purpose. And, I think a lot of our listeners are probably aware of, the dangers of public land sales right now and the federal budgets. And that was definitely, the topic of the week, or I guess the weekend. Everyone there really pushing back against this. Like a lot of large wildlife and fisheries organizations are all, recognizing the dangers in these public land sales. So it's great to know that, every donation that we made, every raffle ticket that we purchased, all those proceeds are going to this organization that's really pushing back against that. So that was really great to see. And then also just, there's folks from all over the country there, places that I wasn't even expecting. Growing up in upstate New York, there's folks that I got to meet from that area. And it was just really cool to make those connections too, because, these are all folks that they're out there and, a lot of times they're happy to get together for hunts. So I think that was really cool too.
That's actually one of my favorite things about Rendezvous is like every single person there is like kind of an expert in their area. And I love traveling to hunt. And it's like every single person you meet, you're like, yeah, I'm down in Florida. Like we hunt this and this and this. And they're like, oh, I really want to come and, usually it's they want to get an Osceola or they want to get an alligator. And I'm like, yeah, come on down to Florida. And then they're like, well, I live in Kentucky. You can come and hunt big bucks, like, on my property and stuff. It's like everybody there, it's like they're already your friend. All you have to do is talk to them, because they all have the same interests. So it's like I don't think I've ever met a person at Rendezvous that I didn't like. So
how big is it? How many people about? I'm talking like 1,000.
I'd say maybe a few hundred. I'm awful estimating numbers.
I'm not sure the total number, but I want to say there was, I don't know, I'd probably call it 300-400 people that were there, somewhere in that ballpark. Maybe a few more. I don't know. Like I think so. There's a lot of events going on, like kind of like around the 2 days that the expo is happening, and so like some people kind of phase in and out at different events, so you don't really see everybody at the same time. Mm-hmm. But it's super fun. There was like a backcountry brew fest, which was awesome. You just like if you buy your ticket, you get some free drinks there, and there's raffles and stuff. Matt got gypped because there was like this thing where you had to like hang from a bar. You had to like hang from a bar for like, it was like if you hung for 60 seconds, you got something. If you hung for, or it was like 30 seconds, you get something, 60 seconds, you get something more. And then 90 seconds, you get a free beer. And Matt was just hanging there forever. And then they basically were just like, you can get down now. You can't win anything else. And then somebody else ended up hanging on longer than him, and he was pissed.
Yeah, after that, they started keeping track of what the longest time was. So I was like, all right, well, let's see how long I can do this. And as soon as I got back up there again, I was like, I can already feel my arms and hands are still tired from last time. So didn't go quite as long, but I still got actually, I didn't even get the drink tickets and I did it again. I think I should.
Oh, yeah, you didn't even make it to 90 seconds. That's right.
I was just under my hand slip.
Hey, I didn't even try because I don't know if I would have made it to 30 seconds, to be honest. But yeah, and then with all the raffles going on, I made out like a bandit.
Yeah.
Matt got some pretty sweet socks and a hat.
Which wasn't even from the raffle, but...
Well, you know.
That's the other cool thing. You know, like a lot of these vendors are trying to, you know, advertise their products, and there is a lot of great stuff that you can walk away with, even if you aren't, you know, putting any money in other than the registration fees. But you got to get the raffle tickets just to be in it.
Well, I think I walked away with probably, I don't know, $2,500 worth of stuff because I got the rifle and then I got the Gerber knives.
Yeah.
So because I competed in the cook-off, which I think we have some video of, so I might throw that up on like a YouTube video or something. But they do this like it's the backcountry wild game cook-off. And so you're cooking on like a camp stove and people are making these like insane dishes.
Yeah.
And well, me and my buddy Adam, we fucked up. We didn't finish. But we got pretty close. But just for participating, you get to keep the stove and the knife set they gave you. So I got this like badass knife set, the rifle, binoculars, so much free stuff that you can get. So if you've never been to Rendezvous, make sure you come out next year. It's such a good time, and there's just like there's not that many people, so your chances of winning stuff are like actually pretty high. It's pretty awesome.
That sounds super fun. So your bear hunt didn't cut into Rendezvous at all?
No, so great segue. So so the bear hunt, we purposely planned that we were going to go hunt the like few days before Rendezvous. So we got there like, I don't know, I got there 4 days early. We essentially had 3 days to hunt, but since we were like working, you know, we were like working throughout the day. But the thing is, it got light at 5:30 in the morning. It got dark, like shooting light ended at 10 o'clock at night.
That was
so
nuts.
So we were able to like work a full day and then head out at 4 o'clock and go climb up a mountain and sit on a glassing knob. So that was kind of awesome. We got to do that 3 days. I found out that Matt is superhuman on a mountain.
You didn't know that already?
Dude, in the mountains, we'll do it to you.
We got a taste of that when he came down here.
Yeah, but dude, it's different though. Like he's like a mountain ninja, bro. Like you know, me and Adam were like dying going up these like steep hills. I feel like by the third day, like I was handling it a lot better. But like in the beginning, it's like you walk 10 yards and then you feel like you're gonna die, and then you like stop and breathe up for like 10 seconds and then you feel fine again, and then you walk another 10 yards and you feel like you're gonna die. And Matt's just like trying so hard to just not make fun of us. But he's like not even breaking a sweat, not breathing heavy. He's just like wandering up this mountain, and we're like walking up shit that's like, you know, steeper than 45 degrees. But yeah, we got up to our first glassing knob, and Matt was our animal spotter. Like, I feel like every animal that we actually saw, like every piece of game we saw, he spotted it. So
there were only a few things, I'll say that. So
yeah, and then you had that weird squirrel thing like walk right up to you.
Oh yeah.
It was like a groundhog or something. Literally just walks up to him and is like sitting at his feet.
Want to be friends?
Like,
it must have been a baby or something.
It had to be. I don't know. It was adorable though.
Yeah.
But yeah, we saw a bear that one time. The first
day.
time, we were like, oh, for sure, we're gonna see bears. Like, this was only our first couple hours. And in hindsight, I feel like we should have been more aggressive. I feel like we should have just gone to that next ridge and I should have just had the gun ready and walking over that ridge. Maybe we would have seen him down in that gully and been able to get a shot off while he
Yeah.
ran away. I don't know.
So it was 1,200 yards out at the start, at least 12. A little, I think it was a little over 1,200 yards, and we definitely closed the distance. But yeah, by the time we got, even before we got into shooting range, he got out of sight. And once we, I think you and Adam checked out kind of that gully and found out there was a lot more land that he probably went into.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like that's the crazy thing with those hills. Like you look at like what you can see, like a lot of times those ridges are covering up so much rigidity, so much ridginess behind it, and it turned out there was like a whole second little ridge set in there that we didn't even know was there. So we were like, oh, he's gonna pop up over this ridge any second, and we stood there and waited. But it turned out there was like two more hills behind it. So we screwed up and we went back out there thinking like, oh, we definitely didn't spook him. He's going to be right there. He was not.
It was also crazy hot during the day, so who knows what that bear was doing. Might have gone down to the creek down below and just hunkered down by the water.
It was like 96 degrees. It was crazy. Yeah.
You're still low enough elevation. You didn't get any elevation.
Yeah, we were only at like 4,000, something like that. So
the Flatlanders survived.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, it definitely taught me that I need to get in better shape. So when I go over there in September, like I'll be able to keep up a little bit with Matt.
Yeah, it'll be more than double that elevation.
I know.
Is that where you might start to get altitude sickness?
I think it's over 8,000.
At 8,000 feet is where that starts to become an issue. So we'll probably go in early and sleep at Matt's house for a couple of days just for me to acclimate before we start hunting. Like I'll just work from his place, which is really nice having that option. Mm-hmm. So, but anyway, doing that bear hunt got us thinking about spring bear seasons, and that leads us into this paper. So basically, this paper is set in Canada, Manitoba. And I guess the reason that the researchers wanted to look into this topic is because a lot of the people that oppose the bear hunt often argue that spring bear hunts in particular cause a lot of orphaning. When a female is shot, and that pretty much every single female that's shot in the spring season is leaving behind orphans that can't survive because it's so early in their life that they would essentially starve to death. So they wanted to look at the numbers and try and figure out like how many orphans actually suffer that fate instead of it just being this hypothetical argument. And that's basically the gist of why this paper was put together. So,
yeah.
You want to walk us through that a bit?
Yeah. So it's a little bit of an older paper especially compared to the other ones that we typically do. The data were all collected in the late 90s, and the paper came out in the early 2000s. And yeah, just like Mark was saying, they wanted to quantify the number of cubs that would get orphaned during a typical spring bear season in that Manitoba area. And so they had 4 different years that they were able to look at that. And they did a lot of cool analyses with the samples that they got. So they didn't have to harvest anything. All the data came from hunter harvests. And they got things like tooth samples, and they got samples from the reproductive tract. So like looking at the ovaries and the uterus. And all this stuff was used to inform a model to look at what are the numbers of females that actually do produce cubs in a given year, what's the natural mortality rate of those cubs, and how does that rate compare to the number of cubs that would likely be orphaned based on the number of females that got harvested in a given year. And all the information that they were using for like harvest rates and stuff was provided by like harvest reports that the hunters had to submit. And this was incorporating both resident and non-resident hunters. So I guess maybe, I don't know if it's unique, but a feature of hunting in Canada, if you're a non-resident, you have to have a guide for hunting in that area. I don't know if it's for all species, but I know it's at least for things like bears here. I'm pretty sure it's true for caribou, probably
I
true.
think it is. I
For
think it is for all
yeah,
species actually, because I've looked into going whitetail hunting. I have family that lives in Alberta and discovered that it would be more expensive than I could really afford at that time. Maybe
yeah.
now I could do it. So
So that's, you might say, well, I'm a great hunter. I don't need this guide service. But they have this guide service, and particularly for bears, because it really is done to help manage the population. And so for the black bears in Canada, if you're a non-resident, there's all these additional regulations that you have to have. So one of that I thought was actually really fascinating. Also, with the Manitoba bear hunt, they allow baiting, so that way it helps the hunters identify males and females, and it's illegal to harvest a female that has cubs. So these regulations are just to help those non-residents better identify females, especially ones with cubs. And so that regulation that I thought was really fascinating was that you have to have, once you spot a bear, you have to wait 10 minutes before you can pull the trigger to see if there might be cubs with it, which is just, that's great. And, like when Mark and I and Adam were out hunting the black bear, that one that we saw, we weren't really thinking about, is this a sow? Is it a boar?
I think we thought about it.
We thought about it, but it wasn't something we were thinking like, well, let's wait 10 minutes to see if there's any cubs. Like we did see it for a long period. And so
but yeah, like I was going to say, like by the time we would have gotten within range of it, if cubs hadn't showed up yet by then, like it was pretty safe to say there wasn't cubs around.
Right.
Also, we were able to see, it was a pretty open area. We could see all around it. There was nothing with it. I think if you're sitting in like a wooded area, it'd be a very different kind of situation.
Yeah.
And there, that like 10-minute rule would really come into play.
Exactly. And that's the other thing about like those bait piles is there's a good chance that if mom finds this bait pile, she's going to have her cubs come over, or the cubs are going to come over because they're going to be getting in on that food too.
Yeah. And it's interesting to read that in this paper too, because this is actually part of the regulations that are proposed for the Florida bear hunt.
Mm-hmm.
They're not allowing baiting, and the difference between a feed station and baiting being that a feed station is like agricultural like products only, so like corn or soybeans or like pellet feed. It can't just be like a box of donuts or like peanut butter or processed foods like that.
Yeah.
And a feed station has to be like established for a longer period of time. But that's the exact same reason that they use for wanting to allow that, is that people can sit there and watch and make sure that, first of all, that it's a bear that they want to harvest. They get a good look at it. If it is a female, a lot of hunters would probably choose not to harvest it, even if it doesn't have cubs. But it gives them a chance to sort of wait and see if cubs are with that bear. So a lot of people are really against it. I'm not a huge fan of hunting over bait. It's just not my thing. But because of like the reasoning that they chose to include that, I support it.
Right. Yeah, and it's exactly that. It's a management tool. It reminds me a lot of when we were talking about the mountain lion hunts. It's same thing with treeing mountain lions. It allows these hunters more time to get an understanding of that animal and just trying to avoid harvesting the females. And the other thing
that's exactly the same thing with the Florida bear hunt. They're allowing hunting with dogs for the exact same reason, because their real goal is to reduce the number of females that are harvested. And those two things really help tip that ratio more into the male direction,
for harvesting males. Yeah. And so, I think it's that kind of emphasizes the why there's these seasons. The hunting season is to help manage and create stable populations, or maintain stable populations. And, like we're saying with the Manitoba bears, like you have issues with nuisance bears or negative human bear interactions. And this bear hunt is largely intended to reduce those interactions, keep that population stable. And so, there's all sorts of beneficial management purposes for the hunt. And then also, there's the attraction of tourists and all the money that the hunting season brings in. So that's kind of like the one side of the argument, like you were saying before, and the other side is like the risk of these orphan bear cubs. And so getting a little bit more into that with the data that they were collecting. So they only collected data for the female bears, and they were looking at the teeth of these bears. And I didn't realize that teeth acquire these calcified deposits that are called cementum. I think that's how it's pronounced. Probably bring that. And that builds over time, similar to like the tree rings or the rings on a tree. And so you can count those rings to get an idea of how old these the bears are. So if you've ever harvested a bear, you might see that they extract they as the managers will take the premolar from a bear, and so they're doing that to age it. You can do similar stuff with white-tailed deer.
Yeah. So one thing I don't know if I like missed it or if it just wasn't explained very well, but did you guys catch like they said that they could tell by looking at the teeth whether like when a bear had last lactated?
Yeah. So it's similar to growth rate for fish on like their scales. So I don't understand it quite the same, but basically if you have that period of lactation, you have these bands not occurring at regular intervals. So, usually there'd be typical spacing between the bands, but if you have a period of lactation, that band's going to be closer. And so like what I think of with fish, you have similar things.
Do you think that's because like the calcium is going into the milk and that it's like changing the density in that band or something? Like
it could be something like that.
I didn't quite understand like why, like I don't know if they explained the mechanism for why the lactation creates like a difference in the way the bands are created.
Yeah, I didn't quite understand it as well, and I also don't quite understand like where the calcium deposits are coming from. Like, is it something that is coming from? Like, presumably, it'd be food, right? Because our teeth don't continue growing; it's bone. Or
I think they do, but I think the layers keep getting thinner and thinner like the older you get. So like those bands will keep getting closer together, but yeah, I don't know. My assumption was that because like more calcium is going into the milk, that changes like the way that calcium is deposited in the teeth and causes that disruption of like the normal banding.
Yeah,
it's kind of crazy. Like, such a cool idea. Like whoever thought of that, if that is what it is, it just wasn't explained very well. But
yeah,
whoever thought of that method might be a genius.
Well, the other cool thing. Well, go ahead, Cody.
I just on the lactating, like how crazy it is thinking about it. I think they put it in here somewhere. So when these female mother bears are in the dens over that hibernation period, do you remember? I'm trying to find the number. It's like 30 kilograms of milk or something crazy that she's gonna make to keep her cubs alive while they're hibernating. So I guess an intense amount of nutrients that she's relying on that are stored. I had no idea it was that much. I can't find the number at the moment. Do you guys remember reading
32, that? So I just found it. So a female black bear with 3 cubs. So I think this is where it's really jacking up that number. But with 3 cubs, must produce at least 32 kilograms of milk to feed the cubs while in the den. And
that's crazy.
Yeah,
they're also in that den for like how many months? It's like a while, right?
Depending on, they don't even really hibernate some years here, right?
In Florida, it can depend. It depends on food availability. So if they have enough food, then a lot of times they won't hibernate. But typically, the dry season comes around, we don't have quite as much growth, so they do hibernate.
So I'll just do the quick conversion for all our listeners. That's 70 pounds of milk that these females have to produce to support 3 cubs. And
while they're sleeping.
Yeah, right. So
and then drinking the snow melt to resupply on water. They're saying like water that melts through to the den that she has access to. She can drink and restock.
That gets to an important point that if you have all these cubs, you might hear some dogs barking in the background here in a second, but if you have all these cubs and you don't have enough resources, there's going to be natural cub mortality even before you leave the den. And I think I saw somewhere, yeah, so in-den mortality rates are about 5%. And so, you already have cubs that are dying before they even get out.
Yeah.
And so one thing that was also really cool about this study was how they used that reproductive tract from females to identify periods when these females last had pregnancies based on things like scars on the uterus. And they could
Well, not just
based
pregnancies,
on,
but when they gave birth, because I think the birthing process is what created the scars. So if there was like no scar, or there was
so it
there
was
was
the
something
size of
in
the
there
scar.
about like there were, yeah, right, the size, because there was something in there where they said like that would, like, there was like some type of scar where they were like that was probably a baby that was like died in the womb and was like
Yeah.
resorbed,
Mhm.
or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah. So based on the size of the scar and the color of the scar, and like how strong it is, they could get indications of, did this female have cubs this past season that were likely born. They also were able to estimate like the number of cubs from that, which is just kind of surprising to me.
Crazy.
And then they also were able to say, okay, if it's a little bit fainter, we can still see it. It's got this kind of coloration to it. It was likely from the previous season. And then if
Yeah.
there's stuff where like you can barely see it whatsoever, probably from years before. So that was
Yeah.
just really cool how they were able to see those differences in the pregnancy rates, and then also use that reproductive tract information along with the data that they got from the teeth to kind of have agreement with what was the status of this female. Was it a female who just didn't get pregnant? Was it a female that got pregnant but didn't give birth, got pregnant and gave birth? How many cubs did it have? And then did it get to that lactation point where, it was supporting those cubs for an extended period? So that was really valuable to understand, what are the numbers of cubs that are actually produced in a given year. All this information got put into their model, again, to estimate number of cubs produced, number of cubs that die naturally, and number of cubs that get orphaned. So a
By
lot of the
hunters.
information that they incorporated into this model also came from some literature reviews where they were looking at natural cub mortality. And an important part of the literature review is they get all these metrics for mortality rates around North America. And the metrics that they incorporate into their model were the most conservative metrics. So basically, if you have a scale of natural mortality that might go from like 25 to 50%, they were selecting that lower value of natural mortality to be more conservative, meaning that the orphan bears, the number of orphan bears from hunting, would have a larger effect for that more conservative estimate. So their estimates, if anything, are going to be overrepresenting the actual effect of orphaned bears from hunting effects. And then I think the last thing that I had just to note was that they also kind of accounted for the natural losses of bear cubs. So like we were talking about before, you have these bears that get, they just don't make it even out of the den. You also have some cubs that might die from starvation. Also, like cannibalism is a big thing with bears. And then I think there are some other ways that you might have just natural cub mortality. So they took all this information in and put all that into their model. And it was really, I thought, a thorough model, especially for the data that they had at the time, to get this estimate of cub mortality, or not mortality, but cub orphan rates from hunting results.
So what are they?
They as in the results?
Yeah.
Well, so I guess I'll start with the bigger numbers. So their models and the data that they have, so they have these estimates of all the females and just bears in general in the area, and then they have estimates for number of cubs that get produced, and then from that they have estimates of natural mortality. And so across this whole study period, the 4-year period, they estimate that about 2,000 to 5,000 bears are going to die annually, or cubs are going to die annually. And if you compare that to the number of orphaned cubs, that value was 41 cubs. So you have 2 to 5,000 versus 41. And those orphan cubs, another thing that they point out, don't all die. It's likely that a lot of them are going to die, but they estimate that, it might be mortality rates or survival rates. So I'll say survival. Survival might be as high as 50%. Probably going to be a bit lower than that, probably closer to like 25% survival. So that means that you have maybe 30 cubs dying in a given year after being orphaned, compared to 2 to 5,000 cubs that are dying naturally.
I think it is worth mentioning that the confidence interval around that 41 was like relatively large, because I think it was like 20 to like 60 something.
34 to 50. Yeah, it's not crazy, but
34 to 50. I thought I remember reading 20 to 60 something.
Maybe. I mean, it's not far off from.
Yeah. So
I don't know if that was so much confidence intervals, but that might also represent a range across years. This is the average across all years.
Maybe that's what I read. But either way, like even like let's say it is 60 something, that's still a minuscule amount compared to the number of bears that are dying of natural causes.
Yeah, 41 is like 2%.
Yeah.
2%. Like, but and I think this is a really important thing to think about, because this is what I'm all about when I go to FWC meetings and stuff. I'm trying to push them to make decisions based on science. So when people get up there and bring up these emotional rhetorical points like, oh, all these bears are going to be orphaned and they're dying, like having this kind of data is so important to be able to sort of refute some of those arguments and say, well, this is what the science is showing us, and it's actually pretty negligible.
Right. And a large part of this, is probably because of the way that the hunt is managed. So over 95% of the bears that were harvested over bait piles. So that gives these hunters a much better opportunity to identify if these are males or females, and if the females have cubs. So females accounted for only about less than, I think, 30% of reported harvests, or about 30% across years.
And so let me just digest that and put that into a really nice little package here. Yeah. So what you're saying is that because Manitoba allows baiting, the harvest of females with cubs is so much lower than it could possibly be. And therefore, the number of cubs that are orphaned is less than 2% of the number of cubs that die of natural causes. And this is during the spring season when, cubs are, with mom more so than they are in a fall season, like the one that we're about to potentially get in Florida.
So I think, I don't know if I would say that the cubs are with mom more. I think they're more dependent on mom. I think, these first year cubs are still going to be with mom in the fall, but they've got a much better chance of making it through if they get orphaned in fall than they would come spring.
Right. And I think, honestly, with that in mind, I think these methods, like allowing baiting, would have the same impact in reducing the number of orphaned cubs during fall as it did in spring, right? If you use the same methods during the fall period. Because like you said, the cubs are still with mom. It's just they're less dependent at that point.
Yeah, they talk about
really get a good look at the bear and make sure that there's no cubs will reduce that orphaning rate.
They talk about also once that cub surpasses like the 5-month age, they're way more likely to survive, right?
Yeah.
So the fall hunt, they should already be past that.
Yeah.
Correct?
Okay. And that's something that's been discussed, for the Florida hunt like a number of times, because people have brought up the orphaning thing, like people shooting, like in the last hunt, there was a lot of females that had been harvested that were still lactating. Mm-hmm. And so people are like, oh, like all these cubs got orphaned and they're going to die. And it's like, well, actually, no, we know that while a female may continue to nurse for an extended period of time, the cubs are no longer dependent on it. They can survive without it. So, yes, it may have been a lactating mom, but those cubs probably survive.
And I think it's still something where I would totally support a legal harvest of sows with cubs, and support methods to increase probability of harvesting the boars, the males, rather than the females. But the other thing I'll just mention is that of those about 30% females that were harvested, only 8% had, or 8% of samples from females, of their reproductive tracts showed that they had given birth that previous season. So even
Yeah.
smaller amount actually did give birth, and of those, they might have already lost their cubs. They didn't. There's no way
Yeah.
to say if a female that gave birth the previous season had lost its cubs.
Right, and especially considering that they, like you said, a lot of them were harvested over bait, which means that the hunter had time to wait and see if there was cubs. So chances are there wasn't cubs with those females that were harvested that still showed that they had cubs that previous season.
Right.
So yeah, it probably means they already lost them to natural causes.
Mm-hmm. But they did account for that in their model. So,
Yeah.
40 about 40 cubs in a given year still accounts for that.
Yeah.
So yeah, and the other thing that I thought was kind of cool from the results with those reproductive tracts was that they were able to see it's very rare for females to give birth 2 years in a row, which I just thought that was a fascinating point, which comes back again to our, and also I think it's after maybe like 5 years that you might have sows that will be giving birth. It takes them a few years before they have their first pregnancy.
Yeah.
So it's possible that that bear that we saw, even though it didn't have any cubs with it, that still might have been a female. And it's also possible, maybe it was a female that had a cub or cubs, but those cubs got taken out by. There's a lot of wolves in that area, so all sorts of different things. But I think it's safe to say that whether if we did harvest that sow or that bear in Montana, even if it was a sow, probably wouldn't have had an effect on orphaning any cubs.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty safe to say that bear did not have cubs with it, because we got a good look at it. We saw its surroundings. If there was cubs there, they would have been out there with her already, where we could see them.
Yeah.
So, but I think the my favorite takeaway from this paper is just how effective these methods can be at reducing, orphaning rates. Which I think is a really important thing to focus on, especially down here in Florida, as we're considering this hunt proposal that includes allowing baiting, and allowing treeing bears with dogs, because I would bet that that would have a similar effect as well.
Yeah,
the hunting with dogs. So
yeah, and this brings me back to when I was in Vermont and I did a couple bear hunts there. Much different terrain. It's much more dense wooded areas, so you don't really have as much time to see the animals. And I saw a decent number of bears between just walking through the woods and only a couple times on hunts, or maybe just one time while I was on a hunt. And it was a archery hunt, and I was halfway up a tree, the bow was still on the ground. This bear was in and out of sight within just a couple minutes, not even that. And I'm just thinking about how they talk about the non-residents having that 10-minute wait period. Like, that doesn't work unless you have a bait pile, because the bears, if you see it, or if you have, like in our case, this super open terrain, but if you don't have the open terrain, you don't have that bait pile, chances are that bear is going to be moving and you don't have time to wait to see anything. I imagine Florida is going to be a similar situation. You don't have these glassing knobs where you can figure out, okay, is this a single bear, and you don't have the opportunity to really wait around to see if there's cubs. So having those opportunities to get a better understanding of what this individual is, and then also, is it something that might be having cubs, that's just all the more reason to have those, I think those options, whether it be the dogs or the bait piles, so you can get a better understanding.
And you can't do that on public land though, but that kind of makes me think, if I were to get, let's say Florida gets this bear hunt, it's not guaranteed yet, they still have to vote in August, which reminds me, if you're listening to this, you should definitely show up to that FWC meeting in August to come and voice your opinions, because it's not a done deal yet. But if we get that hunt, and you're hunting, and I get a tag, and I'm likely to be hunting on public land, I'm going to definitely make sure that I hunt areas where I have good visibility
Mm-hmm.
so that I'm likely to have a longer period of time to like observe that bear. Because if you're hunting in tight woods, like you said, the bear is going to come through and you're going to have to make a choice on whether you're going to shoot like right then and there, um, you know, and you might not have a good idea of whether there's cubs there. So I'll definitely be focusing on hunting like more open areas, getting up in a tree where I can see a good ways. Um, but the people that are hunting on private, they can definitely use the baiting to their advantage. And honestly, maybe running dogs is kind of the better way to go about it on public land, because that will be allowed on public land, to sort of make sure that I'm not harvesting a bear that could potentially orphan some cubs.
Yeah, but that does come with some consequences too. Obviously, that's not something that was looked at in this paper, and you might have. Well, I'd be curious to see, like if you have a sow with cubs, they can be pretty protective. Maybe not so much in the fall, but definitely in the spring. I don't know if that would work too well. You might have the sow charge the bear, or the dogs.
The dogs. Yeah, but I mean, there's not going to be a spring hunt.
Right, yeah. So I don't know how fall would compare.
Well, and keep in mind that spring hunts, like you'll only find like that states have spring hunts when they have like too many bears,
Mm-hmm.
and they're trying to, like they said it in this paper, like the whole point of the spring hunt is to like sort of reduce the population before the problem season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is, I think this, it was like July through September is like the season when bears typically become more of a nuisance. So they're trying to reduce those numbers. That's not going to ever happen. Well, I won't say ever. It's not going to happen in Florida for the time being, because they're not trying, they still want that population to continue growing for the time being. So I don't think we need to worry about that yet.
So are there any obvious sex indicators, or sorry, things you're looking for other than obvious sex indicators? I think they talked about these non-resident people going to outfitters. They had to watch this training video some places.
Yeah.
What are they teaching them? Do you guys know
So
what you're looking
one
for?
of the things that I've been taught is that a male bear tends to carry a lot more weight in the front, like on its front legs, because they're very like muscular, and so they almost look like they're like jacked, like they've been working out and they're like super buff in the front. And so the way that they walk, like all their weight is like in the front, and their head's kind of doing one of these bobs as they walk. Whereas females are, they carry a lot more weight in their belly and in the rear end. So they look like they appear a lot more light on their feet. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I think telling the difference between a male and a female is difficult, especially with the younger bears. And so having more time to be able to look at the bears is definitely helpful. Matt, have you heard of any like tricks to tell the difference?
So I just kind of looked it up just to see if there was anything else. Just kind of repeats what you were saying about the body shape. So females being kind of pear-shaped, pear on its side, the head being the narrow side of the pear, and then getting larger towards the end. Might be able to see some differences in the head shape, but I imagine that's going to largely depend on age. So, like a older boar will have kind of a blockier, bigger head than what a sow would have, which would be a little bit more of a longer head. And that was another thing. Like, I think they said that there was a bear in this study that was like, there were bears over 28 years old. These things can live a long time.
That's crazy.
And, from that pear-shaped perspective, that kind of makes me think that bear we spotted was a sow, because I feel like she was pretty heavy in the rear. She had that more pear shape, but could also have just been a younger boar.
Yeah. So, I would guess that bear was probably maybe like around 4 or 5 years old. I don't think it was a very old one.
It was large. I mean, however old it was a large bear.
Yeah. And another thing that I've heard you could do with bears to get an idea of like how old and how large it might be is like the gap between the belly and the ground.
Yeah.
And I think, I think that bear had a decent gap, which is
I
part of the
agree.
reason I think it might have been a little bit younger. But you're right, we could see it, from 1,000 yards away as a little speck without the
With the naked
binoculars.
eye, like
Yeah.
I could tell it was a bear. I could see it moving, so but yeah, I guess it's time to wrap this up. So let's ask that question we always ask, like how would this make you guys approach bear hunting differently? Cody, you're gonna have to imagine that you've already bear hunted.
Well, can I ask you guys a question then before you state actual
Yeah.
facts here? I was wondering what you guys thought on how like regionally specific these numbers and results would be. I mean, they have like wolves, other mortality risks up there up north, less people than we do down here in Florida. Maybe the environment with all the water, it's harder to forage here. I don't know. How different do you think the numbers would be?
And
Bears down here.
while I do agree with that, like we have less large predators down here in Florida, we do have these giant um, human predators in cars, and so
Yeah.
there's like a huge mortality rate just from people hitting cars in Florida that I think is probably a lot lower in rural parts of Manitoba.
I think you said
Um,
people hitting cars. Cars
Sorry,
hitting bears.
hitting bears with cars. Sorry,
Okay.
yeah, you know what I was saying. Um,
And you guys
but I
have
do
those
think that
massive snakes down there that could probably eat a cub.
they
And
could definitely
gators.
get cub, and
And
they do share the same range, and cubs do get eaten by pythons. Alligators can eat, cubs easily. So there is a lot of predators down here in Florida that they have to contend with.
I wonder if
Panthers, I'm
Panther
sure, like
would
I'm
like
sure,
preemptively, because that paper we read,
yeah,
the bears will push the panthers
yeah, but
off
I'm
their
sure a
fields.
panther would eat a cub in a
Yeah,
heartbeat. So, but
maybe
it is an important
like
question.
lions and
They do they do address their assumptions for their model. They say
Mhm.
like that all the information they pulled out of the literature to build the model makes the assumption that those mortality rates and survival rates that they included in that model are appropriate for the Manitoba region.
mhm.
Yeah,
So
so exactly that. They try to use data that were relevant to Manitoba, and I
yeah,
imagine there's maybe some similarities because considering it's you're talking about bears and bears, and I don't know if we've
yeah,
mentioned that these are all black bears, right? We said that.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think there's probably going to be a lot of differences. But still, if you have programs in place to limit female harvest, I think that those programs across species, across areas, have been shown to limit female harvest. And so I think you could have similar results where orphaning is limited if you allow practices to help limit. And if you have, like Mark was asking, what would we do differently? Just think of different ways that you can better identify if it is a female and if it's a female with cubs.
Yeah, one thing that like I definitely didn't think about when we were out there chasing bears was I hadn't even considered this whole thing that the cubs that are running around the woods in June are still much more dependent on their mothers than the cubs that you would hunt in the fall. And like I've never bear hunted before, so when we saw that bear, it was like well, it's by itself, it's legal.
Mm-hmm.
So, if I get a chance, I'd like to harvest it. But now knowing that the cubs, are more dependent, even if I can't see them, I feel like I would think twice about harvesting a bear that I suspected of being a sow. Like I would try harder in spring season to make sure that it's um, a boar.
Mm-hmm.
Because at least in the fall season, if you do harvest a female, her cubs are going to survive. Like their chance of not surviving is incredibly low. So that's one thing that I would do differently, I think, in spring season.
I'd be curious to see what that survival rate is for the fall because I feel like there's still got to be some decent rates of mortality because like in a lot of states where it's fall hunts only, they still prohibit, it's still illegal to harvest sows with cubs. So I
Yeah,
imagine it's still in effect.
they don't allow the harvest of sows with cubs, but I mean, I don't know about other states, but in Florida, like they have survival rates, and it was like
Mhm.
essentially, I can't remember the exact number, but it was incredibly high. Like the survival, if they're orphaned, is really high because they don't need mom anymore at that stage in their life. So
Yeah,
on that,
kind of counterintuitive, but bait and bears or
yeah,
bait and dogs can be like a really good effort to have
yeah.
better,
I mean,
more selective harvest.
that's a really like that's a really interesting point because as deer hunters, like we have a very easy way of identifying if a deer is a male and if it's old. If you see a big rack on it, chances are it's probably a male and old. There are exceptions to both, but like you can make that decision quickly on the hoof as it's coming through.
Hmm.
So I think because of that, like nobody thinks like, oh, we should use bait. And so I'm kind of accustomed to that idea of like, I don't really like using bait. But in this particular case, it actually kind of makes me like maybe want to use bait while bear hunting so that I can be sure to make, an ethical kill and pick out a boar instead of a sow. So I don't know. I got to ponder that.
And I think it also obviously is going to have an effect on like quotas. If you're allowing bait hunting or dog hunting, or not dog, like hunting with dogs, you're going to have much higher success rates. So you're probably going to have much lower quotas. So just all stuff that goes into
Yeah.
the math of what goes behind the scenes in management.
Wasn't it like 90% of the bears or something crazy were killed on private land in 2015, the
Yeah.
last time in Florida? So
Yeah. And
I
that
guess
that's
they'll have that
largely
option.
that's largely because a lot of those private land places like had feeding stations already established for deer, but they weren't allowed to hunt over the feed station for the bears. They had to be 100 yards away from the feed. So they were just basically hunting on, routes to their feeders and then, shooting a bear as they walked by, but that didn't give them a chance to really get a good look at the bear. And so 59% of the harvest was females. Um,
59.
yeah. So
Wow.
more than half of them were females because people were literally shooting the first bear that they saw because it was like a derby style hunt. Now they're basically giving you a tag and saying you have this tag for the entire 3 week period. So you can be as selective as you want during that period. Oh, and you can just go sit over your feeder instead of sitting 100 yards away from it. So I think from that perspective, it's like people already have these feed stations established anyway. It probably makes more sense for people to be able to hunt over that feed in those situations. So, yeah. I know that if I do get a bear tag, I'm probably going to ask online, like, does anybody have nuisance bears that they want,
Yeah.
me to get rid of? Because, like, I think there's a lot of people that are hoping that would be the outcome of this hunt. And I'm happy to go and use archery in somebody's backyard, if need be, to try and harvest a bear. So I think that'll be my first approach to figuring out where I'm going to hunt. And if nobody tells me, yeah, come and hunt my property, then sure, I'll go on public land. But I want to try and at least make that tag, useful in terms of like managing potential nuisance animals.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, does anybody have any sage words to wrap up on?
Start training for your next hunt.
Yeah, I went to the gym. I'm going to start going to the gym like every day. So, yeah, I'll be more prepared for Colorado. So,
It'll be fun.
anyway, if you guys enjoyed the episode, make sure you like it and do that whole subscribe and following thing, depending on what platform you're listening on. And yeah, we'll catch you in the next episode.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Peace.
Jinx.
And make sure you go check out Marco's Outside and Swamp and Stomp because there will be a new episode next week.